time writing the rooftop growing guide, not just from the perspective of rooftop gardening, but also thinking very much about my training and experience here on the ground. And I will talk a little bit about that in the first series of slides, but it's a wonderful book, and I'm not just saying that because I wrote it. There were a lot of people that contributed to it, experts in their field, and of different disciplines than the one I work in vegetable growing. And we had a lot of fun making it. And it's a story not just of my farm, the Eagle Street Rooftop Farm, but also of many different rooftop farms around the country. So my intention today is to take you guys on a tour of the hidden world of rooftops. And the reason I wanted to do that is because rooftops are some of the most difficult and unusual places you can garden. You will see on rooftops greenhouses, containers, green roofs, all of the systems that you as ground level gardeners or terrace gardeners, balcony gardeners, backyard gardeners, rooftop gardeners will encounter. And through visiting these rooftops, I was able to pull content about how I, as a ground level practitioner, can be better in my field. So that's the focus. You're going to get their sneak peek, and then I will talk about some of the ways you can use these practices on the ground. I do want to say one brief thing about this intro slide. The dress that I'm wearing in this picture is the dress my mom wore when she was pregnant with me. And it's neat because one of the reasons I love agriculture so much is that it's part of a 10,000-year history. We as people, as a species, have been involved with plants for a very long time. And of course, before we figured out how agriculture worked, we have millions of years of co-evolutional history between primates and plants. And I like the idea of legacy. A lot of what I do on the rooftop, I derive from years of my own practice, looking back on centuries of other people's practices, who themselves derived from thousands of years of history. And in fact, it's kind of why I keep old clothes, because sometimes the way things have always been done are the best way, and then how you can change and improve them is a good lesson. One of the books that I read most often when I'm trying to figure out how to garden is actually Virgil. He wrote a really good book called Gregorics, and you can read a passage that he wrote close to 3,000 and a half years ago about right? That's pretty much. All right, so on that note, what I'm going to do is mic up. Can you still hear me? Are we getting there? There we go. Yeah. Awesome. All right, that's my book. That's me. This is the family garden here at the New York Botanical Garden. Are there people here who have visited there? Hooray! And I know a lot of the hands that are up right now are people that I work with. Thank you guys for coming. This place is taken care of by many staff, about 27 part-time staff, as well as 100 registered volunteers. If leaving this lecture you're inspired to learn and grow in a space besides your own, please consider coming out and joining us. And what I point out about this space is that it is unusual. It's in the Bronx. It's 2 acres in the heart of the Bronx. It is an oasis, as the entire New York Botanical Garden is. Our site, the Botanical Garden campus, has 50 acres of forest, as many of you know, that has been uncut since the last several centuries, and that's really remarkable. A lot of the things that I love about learning in this space have to do with the kind of people that I work with, the organic practices we use, but also the challenges of growing in an urban environment. And one thing I'll point out about this picture in particular is that, as organic gardening practitioners, one of the things we balance is we have our vegetable production space, and we also have a meadow. And the nice thing about that is that a lot of vegetable gardening is a partnership. You're not just growing vegetables you yourselves alone. Sometimes you have a friend help you, or colleagues or students. But you also have the ecosystem around you. The wasps, the bees, the ants, the rabbits, contribute manure. They don't just eat vegetables. And all of that partnership is something that you have to ask for. So one of the ways we ask for that help is by planting a space like the meadow, which attracts a lot of those beneficial insects that then help us pollinate our plants, for example. And it's something I think about whenever I encounter a rooftop, which is a blank slate. You can't just plant vegetables on it. You have to think about bringing up the entire ecosystem that was lost when the building was built on that soil. I've gardened in a lot of unusual places. One of the neat things about my work at the New York Botanical Garden is when I first started working here, I was an intern. And then for the 6 years that followed, I was part-time and seasonal, which translated to not making a lot of money. But the neat thing was that I had 4 months a year minimum off because it's a seasonal position. where I could do whatever I wanted. And I certainly worked my tail off, but what I did is I would save up money by growing my own vegetables during the season and not spending a lot of money on overseas. And then the money I saved, I would use to buy a one-way ticket to a country in the southern hemisphere, targeting a place that I wanted to learn how to grow a crop that that country specialized in. And I went to about 14 different countries this way. And I will say, before it sounds super glamorous, that it was very lonely. It was very hard, and I was very poor, but I learned a lot, and it was tons of fun. And so what I wanted to show you were a couple of pictures from places that I thought were doing some very unusual things with vegetables. This is Lake Titicaca in Peru. It's Peru, Bolivia, but mostly in Peru. That area of the world is spectacular. If you ever have a chance to go, it's one of the oldest ongoing growing civilizations. So there are crops that have been grown there for thousands of years by people practicing in the same way they practice for thousands of years. This is a lake on which people use naturally growing reeds that they harvested out of the lake to build islands. These are man-made islands. And in them you'll see little pockets here. They've mounded up more of the reeds and allowed them to decompose, and they brought in some soil substrate, and they're planting potatoes, which of course is quite famously a crop grown in Peru. And I was in Peru specifically to learn more about potato growing, as well as coca. So I thought that was actually spectacular. It saved people the trip of going to the market, although of course they did commute down to the market, and actually commute all their kids to school too. This is a similar system that I saw in West Africa. This is the village of Nsalizu, and the thing that was interesting, I saw this village years before I went to Bolivia and Peru. This is another waterborne village where instead of growing the vegetables, people mostly were fisher folk, but there were canoes that they would fill up with produce that they had brought from the mainland and then bring them out to sell. And I noticed some of the women were seed-saving tomatoes and corn off of the produce that was being brought in, and they were growing it in containers. I don't actually have a picture of it, sorry, but they were growing vegetables as well on these platforms. Just goes to show you can grow stuff anywhere. This is, of course, one of the most famously interesting places that crops have been grown. Machu Picchu, for anyone who's had a chance to visit, or you can even now Google Earth it and see how far it is. But Machu Picchu is incredibly isolated. We walked, and it took 11 days to get there. My sister and I, and by we I mean I mostly walked and I mostly carried her, but it was a great trip. But one of the things that's so incredible at this site is that if you are that isolated from the next proximal large town, you have to figure out ways to grow locally. And so a lot of the terracing that you see down here was actually spaces used for crop growing, primarily corn, potatoes, other high altitude crops like that. This is another really beautiful part of the world. This is Lake Tanganyika in East Africa. It's in Tanzania. It's the longest freshwater lake in the world. 23 rivers go in and only one goes out, which means that the water cycles very slowly. The water at the bottom of the lake is about 100,000 years old. That's how long it's been sitting there. The reason I pulled up this slide as an unusual place is that the lake itself is surrounded by rainforest, really dense forest land. This is the site where Jane Goodall does all the research in the Gulf Bay. In any case, as it has progressed to become an agricultural site, what people are doing, you can see this sort of in the bald spots up on the hills there, is that they're clear-cutting forests and then creating terrace landscapes and growing a lot of cash crops, corn, again, primarily. What I will point out about this is that when I was working with these farmers, one of the things I was really interested in was looking at how agriculture on a hillside area affects runoff and what it means for a lake system where the water doesn't move. So what you end up with is a lot of the landscaping that's happening on these hills. There's sediment runoff that's building up in the shallows of the lake. And the lake has a lot of endemic species. It has, in particular, a fish called a cichlid, which is an interesting species because it evolves within a generation. It evolves adaptations very quickly. So as sediment was building up in the shallows of the lake, the fish were changing from, their mouth was changing from being just like a food feeder that was floating through the lake to a bottom feeder. Their jaw was actually changing. Because there was so much more sediment, there was more food building up in the sediment, and they were then becoming bottom feeders like a catfish is. The reason I pull up this slide is because while very excited about the idea of growing in an unusual place and thinking about how we can take our gardening to the next level on rooftops or in backyards, one of the interesting consequences of agriculture in particular and of food growing growing is you will change your ecosystem. You're going to be bringing in different plants and bringing in different soil. You're going to be putting fertilizers and nutrients on your plants in order to grow them for yourself, whether organic or non-organic. And all of that affects everything else around you. And this was one of the places in the world where that struck me most obviously. It is a quickly changing lake because of human influence. Urban spaces is my expertise. The Eagle Street Rooftop Farm is certainly the most unusual place I've ever grown, and I will show you a picture of that in a minute. But in doing the Eagle Street Farm, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of other urban growers who are doing funky things with their vegetables. Many of you might have heard of Will Allen. He's out in Milwaukee. He's the CEO of Growing Power. Growing Power is an organization that does agriculture in a lot of different ways. They have ground level farms in open urban spaces. They have this operation, which is aquaponics, which is practices using live fish and their manure as a fertilizer for hydroponically run crops. They're also doing container gardening. That's just standard container gardening in the back there, but it's the manure they're using is worm manure. So where you see the plants hanging, right behind them are giant worm bins. And they're using the worm manure to then fill the containers. So that entire greenhouse is a completely self-contained system between the fertilizing and the composting. It's pretty cool. So Growing Power was one project I really admired. On the right here is a newer project called the Low Line. One of the co-founders was an apprentice at my farm before she started this project. This is a concept, but the concept that they'd like to build towards is to take over an underground train station in Manhattan that has been abandoned down near Essex Market and turn it entirely into an underground growing space. And the way they're doing that is they're taking fiber optic cables that they're running from different portals in the ceiling and then running the fiber optic lines to concentrated spotlights that then shine light on the plants. Now, if you'd like to see this, you can. I have a lab right now. It's above ground, but it's still an enclosed, windowless room. It's near Essex Market, and again, it's called the Low Line. But the thing I think is so interesting about this is that everybody said it couldn't be done. You can't grow plants indoors. That's too weird. But as we, as gardeners, know, there are lots of different kinds of plants, and some of them have different needs in their habitats than others, and there are plenty of plants that love growing in the shade. So a lot of times when I'm asked, well, I have a very shady backyard, what can I grow? The first place I will point them to is the New York Botanical Garden, where you can visit the native plant garden, which has a shadier understory tree space, and you can look at that landscape. And the amazing thing about this place, in addition to everything else, is that all the plants are labeled. So when you come here and you're kind of shopping around for ideas, you can walk into the azalea garden, for example, which is a shadier space, and read the labels, and those plants will then do well in your shady backyard, if the soil is okay. The low line is another place I would point you to, because the low line is growing with pretty much no light. The other one that I was looking to as a neat urban growing space, this is a slide of a close-up of the hydroponic operations at Gotham Greens. Growing Power, Low Line, Gotham Greens. Gotham Greens is a greenhouse hydroponic system for-profit business. And they are also on rooftops right now. They're in Chicago and New York. Hydroponics is not something I'm going to talk a lot about today. I don't think it's relevant to this crowd. But I'm happy to take questions about it later. In any case, what I think is really neat about it is that this is a space that, because it's on a roof, they were worried about the weight of the soil. They wanted to have high production year-round. And so in order to be a for-profit business without taxing the building's engineering, they decided to do a very unusual thing, which is large-scale hydroponic growing. So this is my farm.
Oh, wow.
You know, it's so pretty.
So
We're very lucky. It is it's situated in a very beautiful place. This is in North Brooklyn, New York. You're welcome to visit. We have open Sunday hours at the end of the month, starting in April. And if you Google rooftop farm Annie, you'll get all the stuff you need. What I would point out about this space is that it is a green roof, and I'm going to spend the next couple of slides explaining what that technology means. It's in 6 inches of soil depth. So a lot of folks feel challenged. Most vegetable growers would prefer 18 to 24 inches. A lot of folks feel challenged by their space because they think their containers are too shallow. The takeaway from this for me is that if you are shallow in height, but you are large in width, volume is really what matters for a lot of plants. Okay, so overall volume. So if you're going shallow, go wide with your containers. And that has a lot to do with the plant's ability to then spread their roots laterally. course, this is very dependent on your plant palette. I'm going to talk mostly about vegetables today, appropriately. But that has been a really big learning curve for us. This is what a green roof system looks like. I illustrated my book, so these are our pictures. And I will point out, if anybody here is a comic book fan, I used the color palette from Hergé's Tintin. Anybody ever read Tintin? Anyway, this is what a green roof system looks like. There are plants on top, and then what's called growing media. It's our word for soil. It's manufactured, just like compost is made. You do not ever put soil from the ground on your roof. Never put soil from the ground on your roof. Okay. Underneath that is a layer of filter fabric. It's made of usually recycled felt-like material. The filter fabric stops the growing media from going into the next layer, shown here in blue, which are black plastic cups. They're not always black in color, but often, and it looks sort of like an egg curtain. And it collects water, and then there are little holes where it also can drain water. And that is a really important part of why green roofs have the environmental benefits they do, one of which is storm water retention. We in New York have a sewage system that's over 100 years old, but our population has definitely grown in the last century. We also have combined sewage overflow, which means that when we have a huge storm event, our water then goes out of our septic system, oftentimes without total filtration, because that combined sewage system. And because we have so many more people living in New York, and our sewers are our pipes are so small, this is a really big environmental issue for us, particularly as climate change gives us more and more dramatic storms. So what would typically happen during a heavy storm is that the rainwater would be absorbed by the ground. When you build buildings, that soil is lost. So what a green roof does through this system is in those cups, it helps hold water. In the growing media, it helps hold water. And then in that retention, it can then slowly percolate later into the less overtaxed septic system. Underneath those black plastic cups is typically a waterproofing membrane or another layer of filter fabric. That waterproofing membrane is very important because the last layer is your roof. And roofs are there to protect your building. Roofs are not there so you can grow vegetables. You have to protect the building first, and you have to make sure there are no leaks that are going to damage your structure, and then you can go ahead and do the vegetable growing you want. Most times when people think of green roofs, they think of something like this. This is on top of the Randall's Island Parks Department building, the Five Borough Parks building. This project is really neat and actually publicly accessible. You have to request permission and make an appointment with the Parks Commissioner. But once you go up there, they have about, I think, 120 different green roof models that you can look at. This is a modular system. It's growing sedum. So modulars are basically small containers. Anyone who's interested in doing a green roof and doesn't know where to begin, modular systems are an easy way to go. Sedum isn't my top plant choice because it's neither edible. When it flowers, it attracts pollinators, but most of the time it's fairly passive. For many people, that's a plus. If you don't have a roof that can support a lot of weight, that's a good way to go. What I will say about this system is that you can get a little more creative. Here's another example of a green roof system that is using a more colorful blend of sedum. This one is out in California in San Francisco. I actually had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to visit this roof, so I can't tell you the name, but let me make a point and then I'll see if you can guess where I am. So one of the things that I have, not against sedum, but one of the reasons I'm not as interested in sedum on a rooftop or in a garden is that, as I said, they don't really attract pollinators. They're also not a place that you'll see a lot of birds. And part of the beauty of gardening is interacting with green system. So I like to be in a space that's full of life other than myself. So that said, this is sort of a neutral dead zone, and there are not a lot of trees, which is interesting considering all the twittering that goes on down below. This is a much more creative roof. This is out of the family garden. So here we have creeping jenny, which is a sedum, and also edible, I believe. You can eat it kind of peppery. Instead of just doing all sedum, however, at the family garden on this pilot green room, we've included thyme, clover, which you can make a tea out of, good for ladies, and also calendula, which is a beautiful dye plant and also can be used as an herbal medicine. So this will be perennially green. It's also self-seeding, takes care of itself, the clover helps deposit nitrogen. I'm showing you this on a roof. If you are interested in an interesting ground cover in your yard and you think of your lawn, a mix like this is great. And in fact, if you go to Versailles, which is one of the fanciest gardens you could possibly visit, the lawn at Versailles is actually a mix of different kinds of clover and ground cover. There's no grass at all. It's amazing. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of that great example of how a green roof can be improved, or if this was a ground site, how you could then turn it into vegetables. On the left and on the right, you see the same exact roof on different sides of the building. This is the Chicago McCormick Convention Center. On the left is a green roof that was made with a growing media blend that included sand. I am not a fan of using sand in container gardening or rooftop gardening because it has no cation exchange capacity and it adds weight without adding very much else. So if you can find an alternative to sand, do so. If you're on the ground, it almost doesn't matter, and you can certainly amend your ground level soil with sand, but I don't like any containers on rooftops. This roof, they inherited, it had a very bad plant palette, it had sand in it. They then modified it by adding compost and turning it into a vegetable farm. It's 22,000 square feet, and it's run by folks who are involved in the Windy City Growers Program, which is part of the Organic. All of the recruits to that program have valedictorian grades, so it's a really cool job changing program. This is another example of what can be done in 3 inches of soil. It's pretty incredible, and a lot of this had to do with her choices in plant. This is Lisa Good's rooftop. She's 6 stories up in the air. And the 2 very important things to notice about this photograph are that it is a passive space. She does not have to do a lot of gardening. It's self-sowing. It's an incredibly beautiful and diverse and well-mixed landscape without a lot of work. Those are my favorite kinds of places. Because in vegetable gardening, so we're working all the time. Vegetables are very needy. When you switch over to a corner landscape like this, it's a great break. There's lavender in the corner, so she's still getting some use out of it. Echinacea, which is something you can use medicinally. More of that creeping Jenny with the peppery flavor. The other important thing about this picture, and I hope it's obvious, but all of these areas of mechanicals, things like your chimney, your AV vent, on the ground it might be like a switch out. Whatever it is that's a mechanical object that's important to the function of your home, your building, your lawn, your yard, your balcony, they just protect it from the plant material. So she has metal barriers installed so that none of the plant material or soil damages those spaces. This is another part of her roof. I just want to show it to you guys because I was so jealous when I saw it. She has a lawn. So you might say, I could never do that. How would I put a lawn on my roof? Well, the neat thing about rooftops is just like the ground, they all have their own inherent sensibilities. So I might walk into a lawn or an open field in Maine and have it be quite rocky. I might walk into an open field in Georgia and have it be very clayey. A rooftop doesn't have soil, of course, but it does have characteristics. This is a rooftop that actually had very poor drainage. And poor drainage is anathema on a roof. And so what Lisa did to amend that is instead of trying to re-engineer her rooftop, she fixed the waterproofing membrane to make sure there are real leaks. And then in an area that she had identified as prone to ponding, which is when the roof holds water, she decided to install a very thirsty lawn. It wasn't part of her original design, but she wanted to put something in that would help with that. The other neat thing, and this is true for any garden, is that Lisa made a really big effort in her landscape to create a sense of beauty. When you first come up onto her roof, you would think that you would want to see that big wildflower space. But in the fall and in the winter, when that wildflower space is more fallow, it's not the place you want to invite people into your home and see. You don't want to walk into an empty, quasi-barren, dead plant zone. So what she did is she made the very first thing you see, these structures with these evergreen ilexes. And so when you walk in, you already have a sense that this is a space that's very special and is a garden. Now, I myself, as a gardener, have never installed very expensive metal paneling in order to invite people to my home. But what I do is when you come up to the Eagle Street Rooftop Farm, I have planted perennial quasi-evergreen shrubs right at the top of the stairs, so that when you walk in, again, the first thing you see is a larger plant structure that welcomes you into that space. And I think that sense of welcome is really important. It's going to make you want to work more, and it's going to make your guests feel like something special is about to happen. This is, I think, the last green roof I want to show you guys, but it's an important one. I mentioned earlier that one of the values of rooftop gardening is the environmental benefit of stormwater retention. And that was in the context of thinking about what happens when you build a building. You take away the soil and you put a building there. So you lose the water absorption. You also lose the plant palette that used to exist. You lose that ecosystem. You lose the microbes that were in the soil. You lose the space for pollinator habitat, etc. This is a roof in Chicago. Chicago's where I'm from. It's awesome. You should all go. But one of the neat things about Chicago is that in the thousands and thousands of years that people have lived in that neighborhood, Chicago, by the way, means land of sticky onions, Chicago. And it's called that because it used to be kind of swampy and gross, and it smelled like onions all the time, I guess. And I just find that fascinating because what it is now is a place that's covered in a lot of old growth oak trees a lot of wooded trees. So stuff like that is not what Chicago used to look like. It used to be a kinky, swampy, prairie bottom space. And now it's become a place where you'll see, 200-year-old trees. So what Amy decided to do when she was replacing the footprint of her building is she put in the landscape that would have been there 2,500 years ago. So she found seed banks of plants that were actually native prairie plants. And then she integrated some other flowers that she really liked. But I love this contrast because this is new Chicago and this is the very, very old Chicago. And what's beautiful, and I can't give you in this photograph, is the sound. This place is alive with insects. There's chirping and scratching and humming and buzzing and singing, and that is true year-round. Even in the winter, if the soil warms up, you'll hear critters start to come up. I think one of the things that's really important to me as a gardener, and even as a vegetable gardener, is I think in the vegetable world, there's a tendency to antagonize insects and pest animals, but it's all about a partnership. Particularly as organic growers, it's not just about applying compost and that's like the way that you're organic. It's also about thinking about the relationships that we build with the ecosystem around us to have them become people on our team. Sorry to call insects people, but they're all our friends. And in this space, Amy has a lot of wasps, which are of course important predators of other insects that might be damaging her plants. She has a lot of bees. There are 64 different kinds of bees in New York City alone. Not just honeybees and bumblebees, there are 62 more. She has a lot of spiders, which I know arachnophobia is a real thing. I also have it, but spiders are incredibly important in your garden.
That's right.
They will help you trap other insects. Well, the one thing she doesn't have, which I do, is worms. We all love worms the best, I know, that's our favorite insect. So the pleasure of all of this, the effort we're making to grow in an unusual space, is the control we have over our food, right? So I know as a gardener, the thing I've always wanted were fresh peaches. And I wanted because it's really hard to find organic fruit. And when you do, it's really expensive. And there's nothing as good as picking a peach off the tree, because that peak freshness, you can't ship it when it's that fresh, it's too soft. And the other thing that's cool about fruit is a lot of the vitamin content is developed towards the end of its fruiting period. So the most absolutely vitamin C rich fruit is picked within the last 3 days of ripening. You can't buy that, even from a local market. So when I first started rooftop gardening, I thought, okay, I have 6 inches of soil, but I really want a peach tree. How am I going to do that? So I have one. Come visit, you'll see. I'll give you a peach. On the left here is a pomegranate tree. This is out in LA. This is on a parking lot rooftop. And on the right here is a harvest that I think really exemplifies what you can do even if you have no space whatsoever. This is, on the right, a harvest from a rooftop garden in Bronxville that is container-based. It's very small. I think they probably have 2 containers that make up double the size of the podium. And in it, because they were so limited in space, they thought, you know what, we're going to grow the things that are easiest, but we're going to grow the most unusual varieties. We have Tigger cucumbers, which is a lemon cucumber with stripes. We have dragon tongue beans. We have Thai basil. These are things that you were not going to find in a store. And then, of course, sun-gold cherry tomatoes. I'm sure most people here grow those. They're amazing. You can't have a garden without them. Gardening is something that takes on the characteristics of your hometown. And this is something that's true on rooftops as well as on the ground. And one of the fun things about writing the book was that as I was visiting rooftop gardeners all over the country, I started to notice the sensibility of each space I was visiting. This is a series of slides from places around the world. Anybody want to guess where this is? Paris, yeah, it's kind of crazy how you can tell right away. And part of that is, of course, Paris has a very obvious skyline. The other thing that you might not notice is over here, you see how there's this A-frame trellising that's kind of bowed? The only other place I've seen that is at Monticello. And I think it's because Tom Jefferson was a massive Francophile. So he has derived his, if you look, you can look up pictures of Monticello, but the way he trellises his beans and tomatoes, he just took sticks that he had found on the ground that were branched out, and he just stuck them together, so they kind of quad together, and then he lets the beans grow up. That's a technique you guys can use, it's super easy. So Paris looks like Paris. The other neat thing about this soil is that they, of course, growing media on rooftops, you bring it up yourself, or if you're putting in the container, you contribute it yourself. This is compost derived from the food scraps of Versailles. So it's probably just all steak and caviar. Just kidding, it's vegetables. And then the other derivative in this, the particulate, the thing that is like perlite or vermiculite, is a material called pozzolana, which is a predecessor material to concrete. And pozzolana was the building material used to build Lucretia, which is the city that predates Paris. Paris is one of the oldest cities in the world. So when the Gauls built Paris as a small trading town, they built it out of pozzolana, and pozzolana is the granular particulate in the soil. This is in Hong Kong, and this is in Italy. So you see what I mean? Every garden has its sense of space. Now this is in New York. This is a garden I take care of down in Battery. It overlooks the Statue of Liberty. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about this space is that you would think 34 stories up in the air, there's no way you could develop an ecosystem. But it is in fact robust with insects, pollinators, pests also. And what I would point out about this is that this to me is a really good example of what it means to replace what was lost when the building was built. It's a mix of food crops completely integrated with native plants, about 200 different species of plants. So even as a vegetable gardener, we were thinking about this space as a full ecosystem. We're bringing everything with us when we come up in the air. And actually, one thing I'll point out, those pavers, so this whole thing is a green roof. There's green roof membrane, that illustration I showed you. There's green roof membrane underneath the whole thing, even the pavers. And where the flagstones are up top, in between isn't lawn. It's thyme and chamomile. And chamomile, creeping chamomile, the word chamomile takes its name from the Latin for caminare mele, to walk on apples. And if you read about, I forget who wrote about it first, but they describe in Rome, in ancient Rome, walking on the cobblestones and releasing that smell. That's the plant that grows wild. And I've been to Rome, you can still walk, there's still creeping chamomile, it's incredible. So when you walk on this roof in August, and there's thyme and the scent of chamomile in the air, it's absolutely magical. But it's something you can do on your own lawn. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about my book. It was a ton of fun to write. This is another picture of my farm. It's 3 stories up, and as you can see, we host a lot of people. This is our apprenticeship program. We train about 12 to 15 people a year, and then try and get them out into the world of urban agriculture. It's a 9-chapter book. There's a foreword and an afterword that I just led my heart into. Please read the foreword and the afterword. No one ever does, I realized later, but they're very good. The book, as I mentioned, covers a lot of topics besides rooftops. Probably the most important chapter is chapter 2. It's called Assessing Your Rooftop. You have to read that. It's going to tell you what's legal and not legal. The chapter is 4, which is about dirt, chapter 5, which is about seed starting, 6, which is about flowers, herbs, shrubs, and trees, 7, which is about making garden maps. All of that is useful on the ground, on rooftops, on balconies, anywhere. And the point is because I just want you to be growing things. We need more people doing what we do to make this world a lovelier place to live. There's also a huge timeline, which I'm sure is impossible to read from your seats. But what you can trust me on is that rooftop gardening has been going on for a very long time, dating back to, I have one date in there that's 3,180 BCE, the Scottish islands of Ska Bray. There were sod rooftops there. There were rooftop gardens, not of edible plants, but there were sod rooftops, and those structures with buildings still exist. It's a National Heritage Site. And it goes all the way up to 2009, talking about the founding of Eagle Street, my farm. I mentioned, this is the most important chapter, figuring out what's legal. In that, I also talk about situating your site, and one of the things that we address is sunshine. I know a lot of people as ground level gardeners have a lot of questions about what to do with shady spaces, partial shade spaces. I will say now, in anticipation of those questions, vegetables want light. They want 12 hours of light, 16 if you've got it, more if you can. Of course, that is during the growing season. In the winter, nobody's getting that much light. The reason they do is that vegetables are part of our heritage, right? We made vegetables happen, and we have bred very sun-loving plants. Sun is how plants make food. So if you want robust vegetables, you need full sun. That said, if the plant part you're eating is a root, a stem, or a leaf, those are the things that any plant, no matter how much it's suffering, is probably going to grow. So even in a shady space, you can get those to happen. What I point out in the book is when you're on a roof, you don't always realize that there might be shade. And so I talk through how to deal with that. The book also includes a bunch of worksheets to make sure that people can photocopy it, go out in their garden, get on their way. And it talks through some of the technical aspects that I just walked you guys through in the slides, including the green roof structure and the differences between different kinds of roofs. As well as talking about how to set up an irrigation system in a container bed, for example, how to collect rainwater, and if it's legal. We also had a bunch of different experts contribute essays, so it's called Grow with the Pros. If you see a green section of the book, you might hear from Lisa Good, who I showed you before. She, in her own words, explains what her roof is like. I also did a series of things called Up on the Roof, This is a roof in Boston. We profiled different roofs around the country, telling you their best practices. So it's not the full story, but it's highlighting something they're doing really, really well. In the case of Boston, this is a container-based rooftop garden that I think uses these containers really well. They're milk crates, which is a great thing to grow in. They're modular, they're easy to move, they're easy to lift off the ground for good drainage. Then the last section is a bunch of how-tos. My anticipation with gardening books is that people really pick them up wanting to do something. It's an active book, it's not a passive novel. And so I included these how-to sections based on my best practices here at the New York Botanical Garden, as well as working at Eagle Street and visiting places around the world, like I mentioned. And this is a section where, for example, it talks to you about how to start seeds. On the top, you have seed sowing in a frame. I don't know how many of you guys use planting frames, but if you are interested in figuring out best spacing, having a grid system is really helpful. This is planting radishes. And then in the middle, I talk about how to do direct sowing in season, to plant the seed in the season, but then transplant it out as a fall crop. So instead of having a greenhouse, if you don't have that space, you can do a late spring planting outdoors, very close together, and then use a trowel or a butter knife to harvest out those transplants and spread them out for the fall. And on the bottom, I talk about seed sorting in flats, which is what I do here at the New Botanical Garden. One of the things I'll point out, since I have you guys as a live audience, is that in working on this book, we had a lot of fun. So throughout the book, there are puns, mostly me making fun of my family. For example, on the right, I have a packet here. It says Caroline Seeds Oxheart Tomato. There are Oxheart tomatoes, of course, but Caroline is my sister's name. And what I did is I wrote the description. This variety is known for its perfect balance of sweetness and acidity, a family favorite. Yeah. And then in the barcode is my sister's birthday. So if you are flipping through the book and you notice any of those things, thank you for noticing them, and you should shoot me an email. In addition to the how-to sections, there are a bunch of integrated techniques, and one of the ones I wanted to point out, because I think it's useful to any vegetable grower, is this idea of space-time management. How do you manage a smaller space or a larger space in a way that gives you the most yield? It's something that I focus on a lot as a for-profit farmer at Eagle Street, and as a person working with a lot of visitors as a family garden. As a family garden, we see about 50,000 people a year, including 7,000 school children a year, and we want to make sure that we're managing our space in a way that gives everyone a chance to plant. So here we have some pop-out instructions on square foot gardening, and on the top right is a technique that I developed myself, where if all you have as a tool is your hand, how do you space out crops? And so there's spacing things 2 inches, there's spacing things 4 inches, and there's spacing them 6 inches, which I just call the peace sign, surfs up, and rock on. So if I'm planting with my staff at Eagle Street Farm, I'll say, okay guys, radishes, peace spacing, go. And they know it means the radishes have to be 2 inches apart. Pests, how we love to love them. Pests and problems are an issue, ground, roof, anywhere you go. And as I mentioned before, part of that is at first very stressful, and then it's about developing a relationship with your site where you understand what that animal is looking for, or that insect is looking for, and how you can help mitigate it, either through cultural distractions, like putting up cages, or a partnership with another insect. For example, I'll tell you something we do at the family garden. We have a lot of tomatoes that we grow that get tomato hornworm. And during the beginning part of the season, we hand-pick them because we have the time. There aren't tomatoes yet, it's just plants. So we have the time to see the insect. However, at the time that we're transplanting the tomatoes, we're also planting Apiaceae family plants, things like fennel, caraway, cumin. All of those have that beautiful umbel, that wide, bushy flower, and that flower attracts the braconid wasp. And the braconid wasp is a wasp that parasitizes the tomato hornworm. So that what happens is, at the beginning of the season, we're hand-picking the tomato hornworm. By the time the tomato is making fruit, the fennel has started to flower, and that fennel is attracting the braconid wasp, and then the braconid wasp starts to attack the tomato hornworm. So that at the moment in the season where I'm the busiest, the wasp is doing the work for me. The other thing we talk about in the book is taking care of business. I don't know if anybody here is interested in doing market gardening or for-profit gardening, but it is a great way to make money if you want to make very little of it. Just kidding. You can do fine. Anyway, there's a chapter in here that talks about getting permission from your building owner, making sure there's legal point of sale, all the good stuff. I'm just going to very quickly show you some things you should not do. This roof has no parapet. Legal parapet height in New York City is 46 inches, I believe. So if you do not have that, you are not even supposed to be on your roof. This roof has the parapet height, has the fencing it's supposed to have, but you'll notice that these are cloth containers. Rebecca did that because she didn't actually ask her building owner for permission. Oh, the other thing she has is a head house. One of the things in New York City is you have to be able to access the roof from roof level, so that doorway goes directly under the roof. Because Rebecca was worried about not having legal access, she decided to put up cloth containers to make sure that she could take them away quickly if she needed to. Smart girl. This is something you can do. This is a rooftop garden of containers, and I do this on the ground as well, where the organization has made it a lot easier to care for, and I'll point out the 3 ways how. The first way is when I first came up to Agatha's rooftop, everything was spread out linearly along the parapet wall. It was just like a line of containers. Clustering them like this is aesthetically pleasing, I think. It creates a denser, greener space. The other smart thing that she did is that now it's easier to water. There's less water wasted because the spray, which is wide, is hitting all those different plants. The next thing she did that was really smart is it was her first year gardening. She didn't know what material would be best for the container. She didn't know which would be too hot, which would get too many pest problems, etc. So she's mixed it up. There's plastic, felt, wood, terracotta. The other thing she did was she took all the plants that are perennials and she tucked them in the back. So things like trees, perennial herbs, those are tucked further back. The crops that she wanted access to, like her lettuce and her basil, are right up front. If you're going to create a dense space like this, it's nice to organize it that way. This is another example of a very successfully organized container garden. Here, this is in Chicago. This is a garden taken care of by Bill Shores, who's the gardener for Rick Bayless, the chef Rick Bayless. This is actually a private residence that he takes care of, and I'll point out a couple of things he's doing well. Number one is that the container system, you see how it's organized in a U shape? So he has all of that surface, or all of that border area where you can get in and easily access the beds. The other thing that's really nice about this is he's using a spaghetti irrigation system. I don't know how many of you use irrigation systems. I use a drip tape. Drip tape is one long row of irrigation line with pinpricks throughout that evenly irrigate the soil. Spaghetti works a little differently. You have a hose with a spigot right here, and that just sort of dribbles out water. The nice thing about these is you can pick them up and move them from container to container. So he cycles his irrigation. He has the timer on the same timing, but he just moves the spaghetti as he goes, which is something you can't really do with drip. Drip's sort of in a fixed system. This is the roof in Boston that I was talking about earlier. And the thing to notice about this is if you want to use the milk crate system as a container system, there are plastic milk crates lined with landscaping fabric. You want to make sure you're putting something in there that is a very high quality soil. The smaller the volume of the container, the more likely it is to be dried out or have temperature fluctuation, whether it's too hot or too cold. So you want to make sure that the soil you're putting in is the highest quality soil you can use. I typically recommend when you buy a potting mix to buy a blend that has peat moss. It's known as a product that drains well and retains water well, and then you can blend in your own amount of compost. If you're on the ground, blend in as much compost as you can. If you're on a balcony or any other space with weight constraints, you want to be aware of how much you're adding. And you might say, how will I know? And I will say, in my book, there's a section on saturated soil testing. So you know how much your soil weighs when it's wet. The neat thing about this space is that in Boston, there's a lot of snow. The wind blows off the Boston Harbor and pushes all the snow to the parapet edge. So because these are milk crates, they're easy to move. It takes a while, but you can still do it. And so during snow periods, they're able to move the containers around to accommodate that additional weight load of the snow. Vertical gardening is also something that's quite unusual, and I'll just briefly point out 2 different styles. One is vertical gardening that I think we're probably all familiar with as gardeners, trellis. Peas, beans, Malabar spinach, all of those are crops that just need a trellis or a pergola, something to grow up. That's of course seasonal growth unless it's grapes. And then here we have vertical gardening, which is I think the way most people mean it, which is taking a container system or a hydroponic system, doing anything vertically. This, I will point out, is a really different field. If you're interested in doing this, you're going to come across a lot of challenges. With this system in particular, these containers are very small, so the plants are kind of stressed. It's also a solid system, which means that the direction you face it matters because it's going to block sun exposure depending on how you place it. Okay. The other thing about this system I'll point out is that the containers are a dark color. Just don't do that. It's going to get hot. It seems logical to me, but you didn't think about it. They also have this facing east is behind and west is forward. As gardeners, we all know that that's insane, right? Because the sun comes up in the morning and is completely blocked. I don't know, terrible example. Then Chicago. Okay, so gardening can happen anywhere. This is a drawing I did talking about how that's true. And actually, this is the flap, the fold-out flap of the book. And again, because I have you in front of me, one thing I'll point out about it is that all of the leaves and dots are actually long lines and dots in Morse code. And if you translate it and send me an email, I'll give you a prize. They're all secret notes of my family. In any case, these are different gardens that we visited. I have been so inspired in working on this project because it really let me see all the different possibilities out there. And I want you guys to go forward to the spring feeling like you too can take on some unusual spaces. So what I'm going to do is open up now for questions. I'll probably, let's say, like 20 minutes of questions. And then what I would encourage you to do if you'd like to learn more or stay in touch, these are our Twitter feeds and Instagram feeds. And the reason I've really grown to love Instagram is because a lot of my students and colleagues, you can follow along live, like what we're doing. So for example, as Eric and Babacar and Dave can attest, all week long we've been top dressing season and starting some of our cold crop seeds. So certainly feel free to follow along. And now, if I can give any help, I would be happy to answer your questions.
We have microphones on either side, so just raise your hand and we can bring in a mic.
Is it easy to grow a bee hive on your roof, even if it's exposed to the sun all day?
Beekeeping is something that I love to do. We do it here in the New York Botanical Garden. We have bees at the Eagle Street Rooftop Farm, and I write about beekeeping in the book. What I would certainly